welcome to Leading Entrepreneurs of the World. Leading Entrepreneurs of the World features entrepreneurs, founders, and business leaders presenting on cutting-edge topics and the latest in industry developments. Our goal is to provide the global business and entrepreneurial communities with a window into the minds of those who are shaping the future of the world. Today, we're very pleased to welcome leading global entrepreneur and thought leader, Dr. Ravi Fernando. Dr. Ravi Fernando is the Chairman, CEO of Global Strategic Corporate Sustainability Private Limited, which operates in Luxembourg, Ireland, United Kingdom, Vietnam, China, and Sri Lanka. His career with multinationals spanned from 1981 to 2007 with Unilever, Reckitt Benckiser, SmithKline Bleacham International, covering Africa, Middle East, and Asia in CEO business development positions. Ravi was the first CEO of the Sri Lanka Institute of Nanotechnology and Operations Director of the Malaysia Blue Ocean Strategy Institute. Dr. Fernando was the UN Global Compact focal point from 2007 to 2011 and set up the UNGC Sri Lanka network. He serves on the Sri Lanka Sustainable Development Council. He serves on the boards of LOLC Holdings, Ceylon Graphene Technologies Limited, Aitken Spence Plantations, Habitat for Humanity, UN Global Compact Sri Lanka, Ceylon Asset Management. In September 2007, he won the Global Strategy Leadership Award at the World Strategy Summit in Mumbai. In February 2020, he won the World CSR Leadership Award. Dr. Ravi Fernando has an extensive educational background. He's an alum of the University of Cambridge, the European Business School, INSEAD, and the University of Colombo, and is a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Marketing in the UK. In 2017, he developed the ILA Future Directors Program for the Institute of Directors of Luxembourg, and he also created the 21st Century Board Leadership Model Masterclass. Ravi, it is awesome to have you here with us today to hear more about 21st century leadership. Thank you, and welcome to Leading Entrepreneurs of the World.
Thank you very much, James, and it is indeed a great honor and pleasure to be with all of you this day. Let me start by wishing all of you a good day. 21st century leadership is the topic we are going to spend time with today. And I must say, it would be obvious for us to say that in the 21st century, we need 21st century leadership. So if everyone was working according to timetables, we'd all be on the right track. So today, the reason I have picked this subject is my research and extensive work with multinationals basically told me otherwise. And what was quite interesting for me was that in most cases, we found that the world is full of, most times, 19th century leaders who are thinking yet in the 19th century as opposed to looking at the 21st century. So with those few words of introduction, let me start by saying that this topic is a very, very passionate topic I'm passionate about. And the reason I have picked on this topic for today's session is basically to share with you some facts and data which are going to really get you pretty much onto realizing that the world is not really as comprehensively understanding this subject as we have today. So let me start by first telling you what influenced me to think about this subject. Number one, the UN Secretary General in 2021 at this General Assembly and then again at COP26 in Glasgow basically said that the world is facing a code red for humanity. Basically, he said, this is a code red for humanity. And the word code red, I'm sure all of you have heard at some point in time, basically refers to a situation when we all need to act with utmost urgency, utmost focus. And the word emergency stems from the medical profession. And having worked in GlaxoSmithKline for many years, I have been in quite a few of those medical circumstances. But what I really want to tell you is, if world leaders who are 21st century leaders understood the word emergency, they'd be behaving very differently to how we are behaving today, because we are facing, as the UN Secretary General says, a code red for humanity. The second element that has influenced my thinking a lot is a book by Yuval Noah Harari, a famous Oxford University professor, who wrote the book 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. And as I read this book during the COVID lockdown in 2020, what dawned on me was, here are 21 lessons every 21st century leader must know about. And if you are a 21st century entrepreneur, then you need to understand what these lessons are. And I simply asked myself the question, who is teaching these lessons to our leaders today? And the more I began to delve into that topic, I began to realize that in most cases, these lessons weren't being taught. So these two issues challenged me: a code red for humanity, 21 lessons for the 21st century, and of course, the need for sustainability mindset. I brought these together to create what I would now like to call a 21st century leadership model. But before I get to that, let me spend a moment trying to explain to every one of you listening today, so what is the code red for humanity? Because if we are not clear about what is the code red for humanity, we are not going to be acting on stopping the code red for humanity or being a part of the solution for the code red for humanity. Every year in Davos, the World Economic Forum meets, and some of the brightest minds, the biggest, most influential business leaders, the most influential national leaders get together and have a discussion. And every year they develop what we call a global risk report. And from 2020 to 2022 to this year, believe it or not, there were two risks that were highlighted as being the most dangerous risks, risk number one and risk number two, that will impact every business, every nation, and every bit of GDP that we know about. So what are these two issues? The first issue that was selected was climate action failure. Number two was extreme weather incidents, extreme weather and climate action failure. And the third one was biodiversity loss. But I'm going to focus everyone's attention on the top two, because if these are the two global risks that the World Economic Forum and world thought leaders and leaders of business have identified as the ones to impact the GDPs and the profits and what have you, the shareholder value of companies, then we better address them. And that now leads me to 21st century leadership. Because if you are a 21st century leader, then you ought to be asking the question, what does it mean when they say climate action failure? Whose failure is it? Who's failing? And what do they really mean by saying extreme weather? And why is extreme weather a major risk to the world? When you combine these two issues, then we have what Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, referred to as the code red for humanity. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the code red for humanity. So let's go a little deeper into this subject. So let's spend a few minutes first about extreme weather incidents. The number of climate disasters are set to triple from 1960 to 2020. So we have 7.5 times as many heat waves, 3.6 times as many droughts, 3 times as many crop failures, 2.8 times as many floods, and twice the number of wildfires. And if I was to give you a statistic, if you look at the number of incidents, of extreme weather incidents that pummeled the global economy between 1970 and 2020, the figure rises from about an average per annum of about 20 major extreme weather incidents. Today, we are experiencing between 400 and 500 incidents per annum, which means we are experiencing an incident almost every other day. So what do these incidents do to us? And that then is the question. And how will these incidents impact our strategies, our entrepreneurial thinking, the GDPs of the national GDPs of countries? So let me start by saying, between 1987 and 2022, as we speak today, there has sadly been 35 years of science denial and inaction on the part of world leaders, business leaders, and by and large, let me now quickly take you through what has happened. Did these extreme weather incidents suddenly come upon us? Did we not know that these extreme weather incidents were going to come? Did we not know that climate action failure was going to lead to these extreme weather incidents? So let me tell you that in 1987, the World Commission on Environment and Development was basically put to work by the United Nations, and they presented a report which is now referred to as the Brundtland Report, which basically said that sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. But besides that, in 1987, the report very succinctly outlined what we now call a code red for humanity. By using the word, we are experiencing globally a climate change and a climate emergency that is unprecedented. And the cause of that is the burning of fossil fuels. And we need to find a solution out of fossil fuels. And this has been presented in 1987. Between 1987 and 2022, there have been some significant efforts by the United Nations to try and bring this topic and bring the sense of emergency and urgency to world leaders and business leaders. In fact, in 1992, in Brazil, they had the Rio Earth Summit, where 192 leaders of nationalities got together and said, yes, we are now facing a climate emergency. The report came to us in 1987. We don't seem to have done much with it in the last 5 years, but we need to now take some decisive action to move away from fossil fuels, which are causing the climate emergency and extreme weather incidents. And let's try to do this by the year 2000. Then in 1997, we had the Kyoto Protocol meeting in Japan. Now, there have been loads of meetings in these years, but I'm only taking the big ones. And once again, they decided that they had to now take some decisive action on this subject. I fast forward it now to 2015, when the Paris Agreement was held. And for the first time, 196 countries signed up to the Paris Agreement and said, we will exit fossil fuels by 2030. Please note, when we met in 1992, we said we'll do so by 2000. But when we met in Paris, we said we'll do it by 2030. We'd already postponed acting on it by 30 years. There have been 26 Congregation of Parties meetings between 1992 and 2021, and every one of them highlighted the need for action to circumvent the climate emergency. However, sadly, there has been 35 years of science denial and decisive action that has been absent in these last 35 years. In fact, I can also quote on the 23rd of June in 1988, a year after the Brundtland report, James Hansen of NASA Goddard Institute basically said the greenhouse effect has been detected and the Earth's climate was warming and humans were the cause. This was in 1988 when he made a testimony to the Congress. However, sadly, between these years, here's what has happened in reality. Here's a timeline from 1960, but I'm going to look at it from 1987. Various meetings have been held, and most of the meetings that I have referred to have been held, but two things have happened during that time. Number one, we burned more fossil fuels than we did in 1987. As a result of which, the concentration of greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere has now moved to nearly 420 parts per million, as you can see on the left-hand axis. During the same time, global temperatures have increased from 1880, and why do I refer to 1880? Because 1880 was when the Industrial Revolution began, and we began to burn more fossil fuels for energy. Now, I'm not for a moment saying that this was the wrong thing to do, but all I'm saying is from 1880, when we began to, 100 years later, when the research was emerging that this is now a dangerous trend, we should have begun to take corrective action. And yes, we achieved a lot with fossil fuels, but then 1987 was a watershed year when we should have begun to change and move towards renewable energy. So atmosphere is now at about 420 parts per million of carbon dioxide, and temperatures are now at plus 1.2 degrees from the 1880 period. So the COP26 meeting gave us a bigger warning than ever before, because at the end of COP, what they said was, even at the optimistic best case, we will be crossing 1.8 degrees centigrade. Now remember, the UN has consistently talked about keeping temperatures below plus 1.5. But now, even the best case seems to be a 1.8. But then when they looked at all the pledges and the commitments that had been made in 2015 in Paris, and also the commitments that were made recently at COP26 in Glasgow, they said, no, when you look at all the pledges and targets, we are going to be plus 2.1 degrees centigrade. But if we looked at only what countries said they would achieve by 2030, we'd be crossing plus 2.4 degrees centigrade. And if we looked at all the policies and actions that had been put in place, we'd yet be going plus 2.7. So here is the code red for humanity. The code red for humanity is, while the world has now realized keeping temperatures below plus 1.5 degrees centigrade should be the global objective, everything that has been done in the last 35 years is painting a scenario where we'll be crossing not just 1.5, but we'll be crossing nearly 2.7 degrees in the coming years. And how soon will this happen? And this is why I'm calling this a code red for humanity. In May 2021, just last year, the BBC had a report on the World Meteorological Organization's analysis of all the research that they have had now for 35 years. And what they said was there's the likelihood of the planet crossing plus 1.5 degrees centigrade, which is a tipping point, by 2025. And between 2025 and 2040, we'd be looking at probably going up to nearly 2.7 degrees centigrade. So what is the impact of all this? According to the IPCC report, which is the International Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, presented originally in October 2018 and was represented at the UN General Assembly in September 2021. And this is referred to as AR6, report number AR6. what does it say? It says, if the planet crosses 1.5 degrees centigrade, the impact to the global GDP will be $54 trillion. Now, $54 trillion, is that a big number? And then it says, if we cross 2 degrees centigrade, we'll be looking at a $67 trillion. Now, why are these numbers quite scary? And I'll tell you in a moment. Because numbers are scary because the global GDP as we recorded it in 2021 is $94 trillion. And if out of a $94 trillion, we are at risk in the next 20 years of seeing us cross these unbelievable heat numbers, and if we are going to be seeing a 54 trillion impact, then any business leader or national leader who's not taking the science seriously is letting the rest of the world down, because we need to respond to the science that is being presented to us. And what is the impact of these rising sea levels as presented? What they're really saying is we are looking at many nations, the ones in deep red, where the impact would be between 10 to 50 million people, and those countries in red would be about 1 to 9 million people. And these are reports that are now coming out to try and give us a serious warning. Now, if that is the code red for humanity that the United Nations is talking about, then would you agree with me that we as business leaders, and we've been schooled in the best schools of business, and we've been told, create shareholder value most often. And yes, we have done that quite dramatically. However, can we only focus on shareholder value, or should we now take into consideration the challenges that are coming at us that will inhibit and could also impact all the value we are creating in the form of the climate emergency and global warming, which is upon us? And let me give you one more statistic before I get into the solution. And let me tell all of you, I am here to talk to you about a solution. But before I get to a solution, I needed to get you all up to speed with the reality we are facing. Because one thing is for sure, we as leaders of business and thought leaders and entrepreneurs, we need to face reality first. If we ignore reality, then we'll be living on another planet. So the last 6 years have been the hottest ever recorded on the planet. And every one of those years is hotter than the year before. And this is why we are seeing the increase of extreme weather incidents unprecedented. I mean, we saw the California wildfires. We saw the fires in Greece. We saw the flooding in Europe. We saw the flooding in Shanghai. We saw Mumbai and Chennai airports underwater. These things are happening right in front of our eyes, ladies and gentlemen, and we can no longer pretend that they are not going to happen. So in a 94 trillion global economy, we are seeing the vulnerability of between 54 and $67 trillion. These are not numbers I just picked out of a hat. These are numbers presented at the UN General Assembly at COP26 in Glasgow by the IPCC and the World Meteorological Organization. So I didn't create any of these numbers. Okay, so what do we do about this? So what I have done, looking at the 21 lessons for the 21st century and understanding the challenges we face today in the 21st century, also looking at the simple concept of triple bottom line thinking and stakeholder value creation, I put together what I would like to call and introduce to all of you today as a 21st century board leadership model. Now, why have I called it a board leadership model? Because I believe that the boards of the world and the top team of the world, the C-suites of the world, must first understand the challenges. It is only then this will percolate into action by the operatives in C-suite and in the operations teams of the world. I've led quite a few businesses in different parts of the world, and I can tell you, if I didn't have the support of the board on every matter that I wanted to execute, I always found there was no finance and there was no support, and I needed to get the board on track first. So let me now explain to you the 21st century board leadership model, which is the basis of our discussion today. In this model, I have identified 3 emergencies at the top. At the top end, you have 3 emergencies. We have the climate emergency, right in the center. Next to it in red, we have the health and social emergency. Why have I called it health and social emergency? And I will explain that to you in a moment. And let me also stick with the top yet. When you have a climate emergency and you ignore it, when you have a health and social emergency and you ignore it and are not taking decisive action as a nation or a business to be part of the solution to the climate emergency, what do you end up with? You end up with an economic emergency. Because economic emergencies don't happen in isolation. They happen when climate emergencies and health and social emergencies impact the GDPs and the business profitability of nations. That is how you end up with an economic emergency. So if I was to give you a little mathematical formula, climate emergency plus health and social emergency equals to economic emergency. So why is it essential for a 21st century leader to know these 3 emergencies? So let me start with the climate emergency. I have already given you a reasonably succinct picture of what is being painted by the IPCC and the World Meteorological Organization in terms of how extreme weather incidents and climate action failure will lead to a massive climate emergency and impact all the fantastic results we are delivering in a way that is unprecedented, when a 20-foot sea level rise is going to pretty much impact every single coastal nation, the city in the planet, whether it's New York, whether it is Miami, whether it is London, whether it is Shanghai, whether it is Mumbai, or whether it is Colombo. I can tell you, no one is going to be spared that impact. How do we manage knowing that there's a climate emergency around the corner? Have we got to relook at what is energizing our businesses? Yes, we do. How is our business run? Are we getting our energy from renewable sources, or are we getting our energy from fossil fuel sources? Is our logistics and transportation driven by renewable sources, or are we using fossil fuels? Remember, every time we burn fossil fuels, we are contributing to the climate emergency and the warming of the planet. And we are already at 420 parts per million in the atmosphere of greenhouse gases, especially carbon dioxide. And we have already crossed 1.2 degrees centigrade, and 1.5 is going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years. So we need to be tuned in to the climate emergency as 21st century leaders, because we need to have strategies that look at our energy, how we use energy, and how we can be part of the solution to this. And I'm going to share with you some excellent examples of companies which have done that. And how do we relook at our supply chains? Can we take the risk of completely having outsourced everything in our supply chain and ignore the concepts of nearshoring and inshoring? Because as you see right now, many supply chains are disrupted due to the health and social emergency. So that is understanding the climate emergency, number one. Number two, we need to understand the health and the social emergency. Now, why did I connect these two? I connected these two because when you have a health emergency, invariably you create a social emergency. Because if the breadwinner of the household falls ill or passes away, who is then going to look after that entire household. And these two are interconnected, health and social emergencies. The COVID-19 epidemic, pandemic, wasn't the first to hit the planet. In the last 10 years, from SARS to Ebola to H1N1 to COVID-19 and to MERS, we've had a series of challenges coming from the health sector. One of the reasons for this, I'm only saying one of the reasons for this, is we have, as at today, deforested 70 to 80% of all global forest cover, primary forest cover. What happens to the animals living in these habitats? They then get caught in the wet markets of Asia, the wet markets of Africa, and it is much easier for a virus to migrate from in a wet market from an animal to the human being. And that is why we have health emergencies. And that is why it is essential we don't deforest, we reforest. That is why we should be banning wet markets in the world if we want to secure ourselves from future health emergencies. And I can assure you, health emergencies have only begun. It is not the end, it is a beginning of health emergencies. Every 21st century leader, every 21st century entrepreneur must be sensitive to this issue and launch code-red actions against the health emergency and manage the social emergency and manage its employees, manage its supply chain employees, manage every single human being who is directly within the sphere of influence of a company. I'm a believer a company must look after its own employees and its supply chain connected employees before it starts doing wonderful CSR activities here, there, and everywhere, and making a lot of publicity out of that. Let's first, as company leaders, look after ourselves. Let's empower our employees. Let's look after them. So the health and social emergency is up there and is attacking every single business. As a result of these two emergencies, we have an economic emergency. And we are seeing the many, look at some, let me just take two sectors just to give an example. What has happened to the global tourism industry? Here was an industry that was thriving. We nearly had 1 billion tourists per annum, as per the World Tourism Organization. Today, in the last 3 years, we've had almost a complete shutdown of this sector. Here's a sector that has now created an economic emergency as a result for many a nation that depended on tourism. Let's look at the microchip industry. I don't know if you're aware that in the last year, we have experienced a massive shortage of microchips. Has anyone asked the question why? Do you know one of the biggest producers of microchips in the world is Taiwan? And Taiwan experienced in the last year one of the worst droughts in its history. And with it, its microchip industry, because there's a lot of water needed in terms of making microchips, it immediately impacted the microchip industry. So industry after industry is being attacked by the climate emergency and the health and social emergency. And except for the IT companies of the world, which are thriving today, and online businesses are doing dramatically, every business that had somewhat of human interaction and needed human travel have all been impacted by both the climate emergency and the social and health emergency. Now, I want to ask all of you listening to me today a simple question. Most of you have done your MBA programs. Most of you have done some special strategy sessions as an executive in terms of executive education. I mean, all of us in multinationals are sent to, INSEAD or Harvard or a judge school at Cambridge to learn these things. Have you heard these 3 subjects being taught to you? Have you heard of have you had a session on the climate emergency? Have you had a session on the health and social emergency? Have you had a session on the economic emergency? I'll leave it to you to answer that question. Now, I'm going to get to the second part of my model. As I read Yuval Harari's book, I began to realize that a 21st century leader of a board, the 21st century leader of a nation, the 21st century leader of a business has to be totally tuned into these three issues I'm now going to talk to you about. You know why? Because these three are what I call the disruptors. At the top are the emergencies, the three emergencies, and emergencies need to be acted upon with urgency. We can't talk about putting the emergencies off to handle later on. I mean, just one of the young ladies who's talking about this subject is a young lady from Sweden called Greta Thunberg. And she has a beautiful explanation to the climate emergency. You know what she says? And I urge all of you to remember this. She says, our house is on fire. And I think what a beautiful way of saying there's global warming. Now, if our house is on fire, then the action should be immediate, urgent. Let's call the fire brigade. Let's do what we can to put the fire out. What if I took a decision to say, I'm going to put the fire out in 10 years from now? I'm going to call the fire brigade. I'm going to call 911 10 years from now. This is unfortunately what is happening with a lot of world leaders and business leaders. We are not treating any of these emergencies like they were emergencies. What if the ICU, the intensive care unit, had a heart patient who needed immediate stent, and they said, let's do this in 6 years' time. Let's just go back to business as usual. That patient is going to die, and the house is going to be burned down to the ground by the time the fire brigade comes. So this is unfortunately what is happening, and that's why I started today by saying 35 years of climate inaction and science denial. So now let's talk a little about the three disruptors. We finished with the emergencies. Let's get to the disruptors. The three disruptors that will disrupt every nation and disrupt every business. The first one I want to talk about is new technology disruption. As James mentioned, nanotechnology has been a big passion of mine. And I can tell you, nanotechnology is the science of the 21st century, because nanotechnology brings together the disciplines of every science that you can think about. And we operate at the nanoscale and we create solutions. Now, am I a business leader or am I a scientist? Let me tell you, every business leader, every national leader better have their pulse, better know the pulse of technology. I'm not saying they need to be scientists, but they need to understand the changes that are happening in the technology sphere. So what are some of the amazing changes happening out there? Number one, artificial intelligence has come in an unprecedented way. And whether you're a small to medium-sized business, or whether you're a large to super large business, or whether you're an island state, or you're an island nation, or you're a massive nation, every country is going to realize that artificial intelligence is a game changer and is going to speed up the knowledge that is out there in the world, and decisions can be made with more knowledge when we look into AI-enabled neural links and taking decisions. Would a doctor be better at diagnosing a patient, looking at their symptoms, with simply looking at his experience in the last 1 year treating 200 patients? Or would he like to log into a database which is giving you the breakdown of everyone with those symptoms in the case of 150,000 patients, and giving you at the click of a button the 3 or 4 potential illnesses that this patient is having? That is the power of AI, ladies and gentlemen. And every one of us must use the power of AI. And today, the nation that is leading on AI, believe it or not, in AI mobilization is China. And how did they do that? They have been able to focus on AI in a manner that is unprecedented. And that is the reality we are facing with technology. Nanotechnology. So I'm going to get to nanotechnology in a minute, because if I start on nanotechnology, I'll take the next 25 minutes. So I'm going to quickly move on from nanotechnology and come back to it. 3D printing. Today we are printing hearts, we are printing kidneys, we are printing, today a 21st century surgeon can actually print these things on the run while the operation is happening. That is 21st century thinking. Robotics has replaced and made most manufacturers much more efficient than ever before. I'm going to also tell you about another important new technology, and that is precision agriculture. Now, what is precision agriculture? All of us know that a majority of our food and vegetables are grown in massive farms, in massive land acreage. But if I was to ask all of you, who is the biggest exporter of food, fruits and vegetables and agricultural produce in the world, you won't be wrong to say it's the United States of America. Now, I'm going to ask you, who is the second largest exporter of fruits, vegetables, and agriculture in the world? Ladies and gentlemen, the answer is Holland. A small nation with 3 to 5 million people, flat land, no room to grow any crops, but through precision agriculture and through vertical agriculture, today, Holland is the second largest exporter of this agricultural produce in the world. A town in Holland called Wageningen is now referred to as the Silicon Valley of agriculture. They have 13 universities, each one focusing on a crop, and they have become the game changers in precision agriculture. Precision agriculture uses 90% less water in agriculture than traditional agriculture. Now, I already told you the climate emergency is bringing extreme weather incidents. Droughts on one side, floods on the other side. None of those two things are going to help with our future of agriculture. And if we don't embrace precision agriculture, we are in deep trouble. And as the planet's North Pole, South Pole, and Mid Pole, the Arctic, Antarctic, and the Himalayas start melting, our freshwater resource of about 3% of freshwater is all now becoming saline water, and we will end up with only salt water in the planet as these melt. Now, if we don't have new technologies to convert salt water into fresh water, we are in trouble. And here's where I'm going to talk about nanotechnology. So in nanotechnology, in 2007, two amazing scientists working at the University of Manchester in London, in UK, created a new material called graphene. Graphene is developed from graphite. And the massive discovery is that graphene sheets capture the salt molecules and release fresh water at a cost which is 1/10 the cost of the highly intense, energy intense, fossil fuel intense water desalination methods the world is using. So graphene, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be a game changer, and this is from nanotechnology. One look at some of the challenges that have happened between China and the USA will make you realize that you need to be sharp on geopolitical impact on business and on national strategies, because every one of these geopolitical maneuvers are going to come and impact your business whether you like it or not. So are you the business leader who says, no, that's for the politicians. I'm not going to get involved in geopolitics. Just get me the numbers. Let's deliver the shareholder value. I'm telling you, in the 21st century, if you want to be a relevant business leader, you need to know what geopolitical maneuvers. Is it Brexit? Is it the European Union? Is it NAFTA? Is it China's One Belt, One Road? Is it Russia's strategy? You need to be smart on these issues. And as a board and as a business leader, you need to know what's happening. Last but not least, in this model is governance. So what is governance? Governance is where you put planet and people before profit. Planet and people before profit. If you put profit before people, and if you put profit before the planet, which is what I would say 99% of businesses seem to be doing at the moment, the end result will be an economic emergence, because none of them are going to work. Let's look at what happened with COVID-19. Some nations put planet profit before people. And those are the nations with the highest number of COVID fatalities. Some nations decided, no, we are going to put people before profit, and those nations have the lowest attrition rates in terms of COVID-19. There are lots of businesses today who are putting profit before planet. So let me give you an example. In the banking sector today, even though in the Paris Agreement, majority of the world's leading banks signed to it and said, we will not invest in fossil fuels, believe it or not, between 2015 and 2022, in the last 7 years, those very banks have invested close to 5 to 6 trillion US dollars in fossil fuel projects. What have they done? They have put profit before planet. And they think they are going to be successful. Yes, they will have some cash in the bank, but I'll tell you, this will all get wiped away, because finally, you've got to have governance which is putting planet and people before profit. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is the model. And I believe most of these subjects I've talked to you about are not today taught to you either in an MBA program or in a governance program. Bits and bobs of this are being taught. We need to educate ourselves so that we become relevant 21st century leaders. So now let me go on to 21st century leadership. And I'm going to share with you some leaders and a few examples of what they have done, why I have shown you these leaders. Let me start by saying there are 4 traits of a 21st century leader. The first trait of any 21st century leader, and you can almost name this trait as a game-changing trait, is those leaders who appreciate and mobilize science in strategy. So I would go to the extent of saying you cannot be a 21st century leader if you disrespect science, or you ignore science, or you tell yourself, I am not one bit interested in science. I'm telling you, every single national leader and a business leader better have at least a 101 science understanding, because it is those leaders who don't have that who are jeopardizing global economies and jeopardizing the planet because of their climate inaction. For 35 years, I would go to the extent of saying, in the last 35 years, the reason we have not seen action to exit fossil fuels is because majority of the leaders did not appreciate science. If they understood the science, they would have realized what we are facing today was going to happen. So number 1 trait is cultivate an interest for science. What I'm not asking any of you to be scientists. I am not a scientist. No one needs to be a scientist, but at least listen to the scientists, understand what they're saying, appreciate what they're saying, pay some respect to what they're saying. Because if you ignore them, you'll be like Brazil, where today they have over 700,000 people dead because the leader said, this is not something to be taken serious. You cannot do that anymore. You have to be respectful of science. If you respect science, the second trait will happen automatically. What is the second trait of a 21st century leader? They will have an urgency to impact the core grid for humanity and business. And they will try to do this by 2025, because I told you already, after 2025, we are going to see, between 2025 and 2040, as per the reports, we are going to see the crossing of the pivotal point of plus 1.5 degrees centigrade. So if you want to do something for the planet, don't talk about doing these things in 2050 and 2070, as was the case with majority of world leaders at COP26. They said, yeah, we're going to do all this, but we are going to do this in 2050 and 2070. And I listened to some of the business leaders who talk about doing things in 2050 and 2070. But let me tell you, a 21st century leader will be focused on 2025. The third characteristic of a 21st century leader is they are leaders with the triple bottom line mindset who look at stakeholder management and people, planet, and profit, and who are consistently taking decisions based on how can I minimize the impact to the planet? How can I minimize the impact to the people and then make a profit? Let me go to the extent of saying no profit can be made without having an impact on the planet and the people. There's no way that's going to happen. But you can minimize, you can go for the option that is having the least effect on the planet and people and try to make up for it with actions in the future. Last but not least, a 21st century leader is one who embeds the 21st century model, the 6 elements, the 3 emergencies, and the 3 disruptors in the board agenda, in the C-suite agenda, in the operations agenda. It's no point knowing all this and not acting upon this. And a 21st century leader is one who runs his business and makes sure that all what we have discussed and company-specific, country-specific strategies are developed for every one of those emergencies and every one of those disruptors and brought into the board agenda, and the support of the board is secured, and then C-suite acts on this and the operations team implements this. So these are the 4 characteristics. I'm going to now take a stab at these amazing people I have put down here. I put down 21st century business leaders and 21st century key influencers. Let me just take a few, just to give you a flavor of what this is all about. Elon Musk is a PhD in science, by the way. He did his PhD at the University of Pennsylvania. So he obviously qualifies for appreciating science. But not every one of us needs to have a PhD in science to appreciate Science 101. Most of Elon Musk's businesses are solutions to the code red for humanity. Tesla is a company that is basically an electric car company, and his leadership in driving the electric car market in the planet has now risen and given all companies in automobiles an impetus to move into electrics. And believe it or not, today we have Ferrari with the Ferrari electric Infinity. We have Porsche with the electric. We have the Mercs and the what have you, all with electrics, BMWs. Why? Because we know we cannot keep burning fossil fuels if we want to stop the climate emergency. His SpaceX with renewable rocket, with reusable rockets, is an amazing discovery. I mean, an amazing strategy. I come from the Apollo 11 time when I was following the launch of the Apollo 11 and the various parts of the rocket that got burnt away. And you ended up with a little capsule with Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin coming back to Earth in some part of the world, in some ocean. Hello, today's Falcon 5 rockets of Tesla, SpaceX go up from a place and come back and land in the same place. And none of that rocket is completely destroyed. Most of it is intact. Reusable rockets. So, and of course, he's launched Solar City and driving the concept of solar into households. Nevada already has about 500,000 solar users with power walls, which are storing the power in the batteries. So Powerwall plus solar, what an amazing company. Sundar Pichai runs Google and Alphabet. Do you know from 2016 onwards, the Google company has been 100% run with renewable energy. And they have just launched a new strategy called 24/7. They are going to retrospectively look at all the emissions that they have been responsible for and create strategies to zero all of them. So the 2 strategies that impress me about Google are, they today are 100% renewable energy driven company, and they have also committed to 24/7, which is their new strategy. Yvon Chouinard of Patagonia. I'm sure most of you at some stage have worn something from Patagonia in the United States of America. This is one of the most popular brands of the States. Do you know something about this guy? Yvon Chouinard, the main strategy that drives his business is that repair is his strategy. Chouinard has over 50,000 repair shops in the world. And everything he sells, he tries to repair them and give it back to you. He's not trying to sell you another new whatever. And what in lots of his advertisements, he says, don't buy this jacket. And his strategy is one of harming the planet to the least possible level. The last two people I'm talking about today, one is Henrik Poulsen of a company in Denmark called Ørsted. Now, why is this company such a dramatic story? In 2009, there was a company in Denmark called Danish Oil and Gas, which was 96% of all Denmark's oil and gas. Henrik Poulsen takes over as CEO and says, how can we be part of becoming a problem to the climate emergency? We need to be a solution to the climate emergency. Fast forward Danish Oil and Gas to 2019. Today, Danish Oil and Gas is a company that has morphed itself to become the company Ørsted. Ørsted is a 100% wind energy company and is among the top 3 wind energy companies on the planet, and is driving renewable energy so aggressively from being a 100% fossil fuel company. So if a ExxonMobil or a BP or a Shell say we can't do this transformation, Henrik Poulsen, in a small way, has proven it can be done and it can be profitable, and it's a massive success in the world. My last example is from Werner Hoyer and the European Investment Bank. As you know, a lot of my teaching is in Europe and in Luxembourg and Ireland and UK and France. I had the great honor of working with the European Investment Bank and writing a case study for them for the INSEAD Business School. And I did this last year, believe it or not, despite COVID. So I did do my research in Luxembourg before COVID and wrote the case during COVID. Now, why am I talking about the European Investment Bank? If I asked you, what is the world's biggest multilateral lending institution, I'm sure your answer would be World Bank and IMF. No, the answer is not that. The answer is the European Investment Bank is a bigger organization in multilateral money lending at a lending level of between 80 and 90 billion euros per annum, which is almost bigger than the combined lending of those two other organizations. Now, why am I excited about Werner Hoyer's 21st century leadership? Werner Hoyer took a decision that from 2021, the European Investment Bank will not invest $1 in any fossil fuel projects. The biggest multilateral lending institution has taken the decision not to ever invest in fossil fuels. Now that is a dramatic 21st century leadership. And every one of these 5 gentlemen, unfortunately, I must mention a lady too, Ana Patricia Botín of Santander Group, which is the biggest European, one of the biggest banks in Europe today, has been leading this organization almost the last 10 years. And consistently, it has become the world's leading bank in sustainability and has been driving the very issues I talked about with EIB in her bank in Santander Group. And Paul Pullman, as all of you know, did an amazing job to convert Unilever to become a sustainable company when he launched the program Unilever Sustainable Living Plan in 2009. So 2009 must have been a pivotal year for sustainability, because that's the year Henrik Paulsen started converting Danish oil into Ørsted, and that's the year Paul Polman started turning Unilever into be a 21st century company. So the people I mentioned at the bottom are all world leaders. I have the greatest regard for this young lady and for the very senior gentleman, David Attenborough, who are on the two spectrums of their age. One is 95, one is 17, but both are equally passionate about trying to convert world leaders to appreciate science, to have an urgency to impact the code red for humanity, and to be triple bottom line leaders, and to do something in their countries, and to do something in their businesses to achieve this. And I can see the European Union under Ursula von der Leyen is also beginning to drive this and looking at a net zero region in the next couple of years. So what I have tried to do in the last 1 hour, ladies and gentlemen, is to raise the question, so are you a 19th century leader, or are you a 21st century leader? Do you have a flawed business model, or do you have a sustainable business model? Are you putting profit before planet, or putting planet and people before profit? Are you part of the problem of the climate emergency, or are you becoming a part of the solution to the emergency? Are you simply focused on shareholder value creation, or are you looking at stakeholder value creation, where people and planet also matter? Are you simply looking at financial reports, or are you looking at integrated reporting? Are you simply looking at excuses to get certificates to pollute the planet, or are you working towards, just like Google, just like Amazon, just like Microsoft, moving towards becoming net zero companies? Are you trying to do 17 things to save the planet, or are you trying to focus on the 2 or 3 things that matter? And the most important UN SDG that you need to focus on is goal number 7, move to renewable energy. Because if you are burning fossil fuels for your nation or in your business, you are then part of the problem. So goal number 7 is a very pivotal goal. Goal number 12, sustainable consumption. And goal number 15 and 6 are connected. One is on reforesting, and number 6 is on water. If you destroy all the forests, you will destroy the water cycle of the planet. So I think 21st century leadership is what we need. And this is what I am preaching to everyone. And I sincerely hope today, if nothing else, every one of you got what I am talking about. And I believe 21st century leaders are going to change the game. And this is going to be something that's going to be launched soon. And this is going to be launched in Luxembourg and Ireland in March this year. 21st century leadership to fight the code red for business. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening. And I hope I have interested in each of you to start a journey today, this very moment. Whatever size of business you're in, it doesn't matter. Just imagine if you can start a business as a young entrepreneur that is going to be part of the solution to the planet and not part of the pollution of the planet. That you are going to be part of solving the problem and not part of the problem. Every one of us can be someone who is becoming part of the solution. And I want to inspire every single one of you to become a 21st century leader in your business, in your nation. Because if you and I care about future generations, let's leave them a planet. Let's leave them a place to live in. Not everyone is going to get a ticket on Virgin Galactic and fly around to Mars and live there. A lot of us are going to end up living on planet Earth. A good part of humanity, this is the only house or home we have. Understand, if you have children, if you have grandchildren, if you have anyone that you really care about who is going to be living in 2050, 2060, do what you can now to make their life livable, and a life that is worth living in the 21st century. Thank you very much. And back to Stelios and James.
Well, Ravi, thank you so much for a very powerful presentation. These are such important issues. And I do have a couple of questions I'd like to ask.
Sure, James.
Over the years, we have seen that certain parts of the world are responding more positively to these issues, and different countries are perhaps also responding more positively. Which ones do you think are responding better, and why do you think that's the case?
Thank you very much, James. In fact, that's an absolutely brilliant question. And if I had known you were asking this question, I'd have had a slide ready for you, because I could have put the slide up and shown you exactly what countries that are responding to this. So by and large, let me not go into too much of controversy here, but let me say that the European Union, by and large, are much more responsive to 21st century leadership and the climate emergency than is rest of the world. So that is a very broad statement. And you can see that a majority of the European companies and the European banks and the European Union under the current leadership and even the leadership that has come into place are beginning to attack the climate emergency with a much more vengeance and a much more commitment. And they're trying to get to 60-70% renewables in the next by 2030. And 2030 for them, or 2025, is the cutoff point for most of Europe. Now, one of the common factors I've seen in a lot of European leaders is they somehow seems to be understanding a bit of the science. So it is not a surprise for me that the European Union are more receptive to this than others. The second group, of course, within the European Union are the Scandinavian countries, the Denmarks, the Swedens, the Hollands. These countries are actually trailblazers in the battle against the climate emergency. Now let's look at the countries which are sort of, saying, now look, the West developed with using fossil fuels. Now you are telling us not to use fossil fuels. We need another 20 years of burning fossil fuels. But what they don't realize is we don't have 20 years more to burn fossil fuels. And we are all in this ship called planet Earth together. And when planet Earth gets destroyed, it doesn't matter whether you're living in the European Union, whether you're living in the Southern Hemisphere, in South Africa, or whether you're living in Australia. Every one of us are going to feel the climate emergency impact, and the code rate for humanity impact as equal. So the countries which are yet not receptive to this are nations who are currently energized by fossil fuels. So if you look at, even within Europe, there are some countries which are yet very coal dependent. So Poland is a good example within Europe. But you can see that even Germany has a job to do to clean up. They have 40-50% renewables, but they yet have 30% of coal there. So they need to get out of coal too. But now I look at countries like China. I look at countries like India. I look at, to a certain extent, even within the United States, we can see that there are yet very strong coal power-driven nations. So the need to exit coal power urgently is not something the Indias and the Chinas and the even Australias are receptive to at the moment, because coal has been such a big part of their profitability and their energy mix in the last nearly 100 years. So for them to change, you need a 21st century mindset, which says either we all survive or we all die. So what are we going to do? So I would say India, China is moving more rapidly into renewables than is India. So at COP26, India said they would go into exiting fossil fuels by 2070. But whereas China is now talking about doing so, actually they are targeting 2030, 2040. So they are moving into renewables much faster than we know, and expanding their fossil fuel, reducing their fossil fuel business. And in their China One Belt, One Road, they made a commitment at COP26 not to build one coal power plant in the 138 countries that they're operating the China One Belt, One Road. But I can see India is reluctant. Australia is reluctant. Now, James, what is common about these countries is majority of the leaders, even in countries like Brazil, tend to be not appreciating science. And that, to me, is the pivotal point that I want to make to you, James. What makes the difference between nations run by science-led leaders who are 21st century and 19th century science-denying leaders, I can tell you the countries which are reluctant to move from fossil fuels are mostly led by 19th century science-denying leaders. So actually, simply figuring out if they did a Science 101 class at some stage in their life is the secret before we vote them in, because we cannot take the risk of voting somebody in who is going to put us in trouble. And I can tell you, we've got so many leaders in positions of power. Look at Russia. Look at Saudi Arabia. Russia depends on its gas business. And of course, their gas imports are a key part of their economic survival. Saudi Arabia is a petroleum exporter. Now, who objected to the use of the word exit fossil fuels in the last 26 COP meetings? These are the countries which blocked it. Why? Because this will directly impact their economic business, their economic survival. So now the question is, are we putting profit before planet here or not? It is very clearly an example of let's get the profit in and then we'll think about renewables, as opposed to, the renewables energy is today 85% cheaper than it was 10, 20 years ago. The new batteries are miraculously saving all our energy. The new solar panels are today getting to 30% and 40% efficiencies. Perovskite solar panels, batteries are storing, and South Australia is a region which is 100% run by renewable energy. And all these companies I mentioned, how are they doing it? Solar plus battery, wind plus battery. So the solutions are all there. So then why are banks also funding fossil fuel projects? So all I can say is, if you look at the top 5 banks funding fossil fuel projects, they are JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, Citibank, and Barclays Bank, followed by Sumitomo Bank, Mitsubishi Bank, and Deutsche Bank. What can we say about their leadership? What can we say about their boards? There may be a reason there to get them up to speed on 21st century thinking. So my answer to your question is, I think it has to do with science appreciation. And that's why, James, I think the first and most important characteristic or trait of a 21st century leader is they are science-led, science appreciating, and science mobilizing.
Thank you. I have one more question.
Sure.
You were talking about leaders today with a 19th century mentality here in the 21st century. What about the 20th century? What happened between 1900 and 2000? What happened? What happened to that century? Didn't we have people who were actually improving, doing things better, and so on and so forth?
Okay, so James, I must tell you, in my slide, I have called it 20th century. Even though I kept using the word 19th century, my slide said 20th century. So yes, we did have people awakening, and I would say the Yvonne Chouinards, the Pullmans, I mean, these were in the 20th century leaders who had totally embraced this. But the problem here is not enough of them did that. So, you know, we need scale, we need a movement. So that is what is missing. You know, European Union wanting to save the planet is great, but if Russia, China, India, and Australia decide they are going to keep burning fossil fuels for the next 30, 40 years, then we are talking of a crisis. So we need scale and we need leadership happening at all scales. Yes, there are 20th century leaders who began to do the right thing, but the key reason I continuously use the word 19th century leaders is the majority of the leaders seem to have not even got to the 20th century in terms of even considering the issues of the 20th century. They seem to be happily sitting back and saying, let's get those stock prices up. Let's get those shareholder values up. Let's get that oil price moving up for ourselves. Let's make the money now. So, but the thing is, you can make the money now, but the impact to the planet is going to last the next 2 generations. So what they do not realize, James, is they are actually crippling, they are subjugating, they are basically robbing all future generations of a planet that they can inhabit without trying to figure out, can I get some fresh air? Can I breathe some fresh air? Can I get some fresh water to drink? Is there fresh food for me to eat? I mean, these 3 are basic needs. But what we are doing today is making sure our future generations are going to be asking those simple questions, because they are going to be obsessed by trying to figure out, where do we get the fresh water? So I think any leader can no longer be a leader who is operating in the 19th century, thinking of next quarter profits, or the 20th century saying the next year's profits. We need to be looking at the 21st century and saying, what's going to happen to future generations? And now I understand why Greta Thunberg at 17 has decided she's not going to school. She's going to protest every day of her life, because she knows if she goes to school and comes out of school with a degree and becomes whoever or whatever, by the time she comes out, she'll be asking the basic question: where do I get some fresh water? Where do I breathe some fresh air? Do you know, James, today, the WHO has a report on air pollution-led deaths. And what is causing air pollution is the burning of fossil fuels. So, majority. 7 million people are dying every year of air pollution. Now, this 7 million can double and treble as the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere keeps increasing. When I was a student at Cambridge, our professors told me that we are now at about 350 parts. We are at about 280 to 300 parts per million. When we cross 350 parts per million, all hell is going to break loose. Here we are at 420 parts per million, and all hell is breaking loose. A day doesn't happen on CNN or any of the global media channels where we are not seeing a climate catastrophe. Not one day, James. Yes. So we should make it a requirement that every future business leader, 21st century leader, at least watches the weather forecast.
Okay, Ravi, thank you so much for your time and your presentation, a brilliant presentation as part of the Leading Entrepreneurs of the World series. We want to thank you very much, and we hope to talk to you. There's such important issues. We look forward to talking with you again soon.
Thank you, James, and thank you, Stelios. You guys are doing a great job, because what you are doing is raising awareness of these issues, and that is the beginning of a solution.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day in New York, and God bless you all. Even God needs us to do some things once in a while.
Yes. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.